The Onts Chapter 9 Bad News and Worse News. Cheyenne woke through several layers of sleep to find somebody shaking her roughly by the shoulder. It was Wally. "Molly, what are you doing?" asked Cheyenne. "What time is it?" "Good grief, it must be the middle of the night. What's going on?" Wally went to the door and peeked nervously out into the hallway. Then he quickly closed the door, locked it, and went back into the room. "Cheyenne," said Wally, "I have bad news and worse news. What do you want to hear first?" "I don't know," said Cheyenne. "Is the bad news really better than the worse news?" "It's better, definitely better," said Wally. Cheyenne sighed. "Then tell me the bad news first," she said. "Okay, Cheyenne, the bad news is we have been adopted by giant ants." "I see," said Cheyenne. "Why do you think that?" "Because I saw one of them without her hat and sunglasses and gloves and pink rubber human face mask. And I saw her 6 legs and her huge black claws and her horrible head with her gigantic black eyes and her horrible mouth that looks like a huge pair of horrible black pliers, only sharper. That's why." Cheyenne took a moment to let what Wally was telling her sink in. "Wally, it's very late," she said. "You just had a nightmare." "Cheyenne, this wasn't any nightmare. I really saw it. A 6-foot-tall giant ant. You've got to believe me." "Look, Wally, you say you saw a rubber mask on the table, right?" she asked. "Of a human face," said Wally. So maybe you thought what you thought was a giant ant was only Dagmar or Hetty wearing a giant ant mask and a giant ant costume." "Cheyenne, you've got to believe me. What I just saw was no costume. It was real." Cheyenne looked at Wally for several seconds before answering him. She had never seen him so upset in her entire life. "Okay," she said. "So Dagmar and Hetty are giant ants. That doesn't have to be a bad thing." "How could it not be a bad thing?" Wally asked. "Well," said Cheyenne, "they could teach us so much about their culture, about their colonies and stuff. Just think what terrific grades we'd get in science class if we did an extra credit project on ants." "We don't even go to school," said Wally. "Well, if we ever did, it would be so cool," said Cheyenne. "Okay, what's the worst news?" "The worst news is that the ants are collecting my foot odors and your snot and using it to feed hundreds of giant ant babies, in the cellar." "And how do you know this?" asked Cheyenne. "I saw it, Cheyenne. I saw a machine called an odor extractor. I saw a machine called a snot press, and I saw cocoons with hundreds of ant larvae the size of Chihuahua puppies. Slimy, pulsing, sickening-looking puppies with no eyes and quivering mouths. Remember, I had to study all the ant words. Well, one of my words was ant, so I know a whole lot about ants, Cheyenne. I know that ants talk to each other by using odors, and I know that ants feed their larvae with body fluids of other creatures. That's why they're feeding the larvae your snot." Cheyenne took a deep breath. Then she closed her eyes. Then she let the air out. "Okay, what if you're right, Wally?" she said. "What if everything you said is true? Why is it so terrible?" "Why is that so terrible? I'll tell you why. Because they're growing a race of super ants that will eventually make slaves out of the human race and end life on Earth as we know it. That's why." "Why do you think super ants would make slaves out of the human race?" she asked. "What else do you think super ants are going to do? You think super ants are going to take orders from humans? You think they're going to treat us like equals? They're going to make slaves of us, Cheyenne. That's what super ants do." "So what you're saying is..." "What I'm saying, Cheyenne, is, let's get out of here." Cheyenne thought this over. It's true that she always tried to look on the bright side of things, but Cheyenne was not a moron. She sighed. "Wally, I agree that we should get out of here now," said Cheyenne. "But how?" "We'll just quietly creep downstairs, being careful not to wake the aunts," said Wally. "Then we're out the front door." "And we're home free?" said Cheyenne. "No, then we're out the door in the middle of Dripping Fang Forest after dark," said Wally. Cheyenne frowned. "Wally, do you really think we're going to find anything in Dripping Fang Forest worse than giant ants?" she asked. "I'd bet money on it," he said. Just then there was a knock at Cheyenne's door. Wally and Cheyenne froze in terror. That's the end of chapter 9. See you tomorrow, guys.